Hey, everybody, how are you? Happy Monday evening to you all. Um, well, let's just hear what Snoop has to say.
Vinny is a man, always doing what he can, growing up tough. He knows how to be rough, but had a brain more kin with numbers and stuff. Vinny the Brooklyn guy, the flow of his show is.
Yeah, the flow of my show is epic. What a crock that is. How you doing, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. I just want to check that I'm not freezing here. So I'm putting something over here that will tell me if I am. The best work of Lennon and McCartney post Beatles. That's a question that many people have talked about, especially me. I've had that conversation with many Beatle fans, music fans in general. And I see I froze. So let's just see if. Oh, there it is. Okay. The freezing stopped. Lennon and McCartney. Well, Lennon is Lennonism. He was known for activism, very self innovative, reflective songs. Paul McCartney, more character based. Eleanor Rigby, Penny Lane, a paperback writer. I think that their styles changed, which lent itself for them being solo performers. I think if the Beatles would have broke up in 65, there would have been a lot different production from both Lennon and McCartney. I think Lennon would have been more like McCartney. I think Lennon, if you listen to his early work with the Beatles, very disillusioned with love. Norwegian Wood. The affair doesn't go right, and he sets the house on fire, he sleeps in the bathtub, right? Run for your life. You better run for your life if you can, little girl. He always seemed to be disillusioned. That love was, you just get hurt. Hey, DJ, you just get hurt with love. Paul was the eternal optimist, right? And then John started singing beautiful love songs, Woman, later on in his career, Girl. But he kind of sold out. He was very uncomfortable. Lennon was uncomfortable as a Beatle, you can tell. And that is probably why he needed the aid of a lot of drugs. Paul took drugs because they were there. But I think Paul was very astute in knowing what he was good at. Paul had a great feel for PR. In fact, John Lennon had jokingly said that he's the best PR guy in the business. Now, looking at their post-Beatle work, you have a lot to choose from, 46 years more in Paul McCartney's case. So Paul McCartney had a lot of opportunity to write a few more throwaway songs, so to speak, because he's continually put out product since the Beatles ended in 1970. John Lennon, unfortunately, we saw an album that was celebrating life as a 40-year-old in Starting Over, Double Fantasy. I got through the 60s and 70s. It was a drag, wasn't it? Well, the 80s are here, and I'm optimistic. I'm 40. I'm not hanging out in clubs anymore. Got kids, all that. Paul continued to be a tunesmith. John became very introspective again. And in fact, to a fault, that a lot of his fans did not like Double Fantasy because they wanted to hear rock and roll. They didn't want to hear how you're doing and you're making bread and Yoko's counting the money. They didn't want to hear that. But that's what he was comfortable with at the time. But you go through a lot of their songs, Now, I always had this theory of why 1974 was a very, very big year in the rumor mill for the Beatles getting back together. I don't think it only had to do with Paul hanging out with John in LA. I think what happened was when Paul went number one and Band on the Run was certainly, as John saw, a return to form, so to speak. And Ram, which originally got a very good rating from Rolling Stone magazine, when Jan Werner, the publisher, saw that one of his writers gave it a 4-star, he said, "You can't do that. It's McCartney. John Lennon, this is John Lennon's Rolling Stone," because John gave the first big interview with him. Jan Werner loved John Lennon, and they were not going to help Paul. Years later, Ram is looked at as possibly his best album, included with Band on the Run. Now, I believe that John had lost a little of the sense of what the public wanted. I think John was so involved with the activism that he kind of lost track of what was really. You got to remember, music changed in the 70s. It truly did. And I could tell you because John Lennon didn't really have a clue because he thought whatever gets you through the night would never make it. And Elton John said, "That's a number one." John Lennon was a Beatle. How could he not know that that song was good enough to be number one? He had lost contact with the Billboard charts and what people wanted to hear. I do believe that after that song went number one, now John was okay with working with Paul again. I think before John had a number one, I think he felt that he was going to be looked at as latching on to Paul's coattails because Paul was the successful one. I truly believe that. John was very insecure, and I don't think there's any coincidence that after John had a number one, all of a sudden he was willing to work with Paul. Now, there are songs like Imagine. It rings true today. No borders, no religion. Look what's going on 50 years later, 55 years later. Was it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Maybe. You look at Paul's early work. Maybe I'm Amazed. Maybe I'm Amazed was a love song to Linda. How she pulled him out of the doldrums. Probably one of the few Beatle-worthy tunes. I think Junk was also a very good song off the McCartney album, but maybe I'm Amazed would have fit on Let It Be. Wouldn't have been a perfect fit, but it would have fit. You look at John's stuff. Could Imagine have been on the White Album? Yeah, possibly. When he was writing Dear Prudence and Julia and that stuff like that. But you look through the career, and we got cheated out of so much post-Beatle work from John. But let's look at Paul. Maybe I'm Amazed. Probably the only reason that the McCartney album wasn't a total embarrassment was because on any McCartney album, you always find a McCartney jam, right? My Love. It's like Elton John. Elton always has a song where he reminds you he's a genius. A piano riff that reminds you that he's Elton John. Well, Paul always has to remind you he's Paul. And we look at the early stuff. Band on the Run, certainly a statement, but was Band on the Run overrated because people were so worried about Paul being finished at 30 years of age that, oh, that's a relief. At least he can come out with something pretty good. I honestly think that Ram is a better album than Band on the Run. I think there's some interesting concepts on Band on the Run, Pneumonia and stuff like that. Uh, Picasso. But I think Long Haired Lady with that sing along at the end, Love, Love is Long. Yeah, that's like a Hey Jude. Um, Paul never lost. Yeah, absolutely, Reed. Absolutely. If you look at Wildlife, I'll just get the track listing. These guys got up in the morning and just wrote. Uh, Bip Bop, that's a Linda song, really. Um, Bip Bop Link, Tomorrow. Dear Friend is an excellent song written about John Lennon. Um, that's a very good song, actually. And you have outtakes, I Am Your Singer and all that. Love is Strange, Mumbo. But, like I said, McCartney always has one good song on an album. Venus and Mars was his cocaine album. He was on coke during that period. And Venus and Mars, undoubtedly, when he said, have a friend who follows the stars, that's about John Lennon because Lennon had supposedly seen a UFO. And he says, I have a good friend that follows the stars. Yoko and John were into astrology. So I really do believe that that was a reference to John. But Rock Show is a good song, loving song. You Gave Me the Answer. You Gave Me the Answer is much like what is that song on the White Album? It sounds very much like You Gave Me the Answer. It's not Martha, My Dear. But there's one that sounds like that. Magneto and Titanium Man, the comic book. Letting Go is a good song. Spirits of Ancient Egypt is good. Medicine Jar. Call Me Back Again, very versatile vocals there. But, it was it's post Band on the Run, so you're going to be expecting another Band on the Run. Jimmy McCulloch joined the group at that time, I believe. And that was, a very good move. He's outstanding. Listen to what the man said. He's still a great writer at that point. Soily, yeah, that was a good song. Beware My Love was very good. So you look at that album, and it's very, very solid. Now, Paul in 1976 obviously is really missing being in a band. So he does Wings at the Speed of Sound, which pretty much he gave everyone a chance in the band to sing. And Joe English actually does an outstanding job with what was the song he did? Must Do Something About It. He actually was a pretty good singer. And, you know, She's My Baby does a great job. Silly Love Songs is of course, the radio friendly hit because he always has a radio friendly hit, and Let Him In. And those two songs shared time on the radio stations. I think Silly Love Songs was played a little bit more, but Let Him In was also a very fan favorite and a radio friendly song. Beware My Love is a good rocker. And then he goes to, from 76, he goes to London Town. Now, London Town, he sailed along in, I don't know where he was, but he rented a yacht, put a studio on a yacht, and did his rock star thing. London Town, I thought was a very good song. Thought it was a good song. Deliver Your Children's very good. Famous Groupies is fun. Deliver Your Children's a good song with Denny Lane. And I've Had Enough, radio friendly. Virgin Islands, thank you, Reed. Undoubtedly cocaine induced. Don't Let It Bring You Down. I like that song. So that was a decent work. I think it was disappointing. And, you know, now you have Wings at the Speed of Sound, which had a couple of good commercial songs on it, but it wasn't viewed as an overly great work of art. And then you have London Town, which is a little dark and a little hopeless for a lot of people that were expecting another band on the run from Paul. Now, he does come back in 79 with an album that I think was actually a really good album, Back to the Egg. Getting Closer is a very good song. Arrow Through Me is probably one of his top 3 songs. It's post-Beatle. Arrow Through Me. Coming Up, yeah. Coming Up is the song that brought John Lennon out of retirement. Rockestra Theme, overbloated piece of music for Paul, showing you he's Paul. Baby's Request. So that brings him back to some rock. And then he decides to do McCartney 2, which McCartney 2 basically was a cassette that he worked on. He wanted to hear music while he was driving around. And he did an album that he could listen to with Temporary Secretary and all that stuff. Pretty good. It was very conceptual at the time. And no one knew what to make of it because you hadn't had many of those albums at that point. You haven't seen anything like that. But, and he also had Wonderful Christmas Time on that album, which was a big hit. Yeah. Hey, Michael, how are you, man? Yeah, Michael is an expert at Paul McCartney. Yeah, London Town I liked. It gets a little clever with Famous Groupies and all that, but London Town is a solid Paul McCartney based little novelette, and he's very good at that. Paul is very, very good at being Paul. Nobody told me, Woman was that should be the flip side of Girl. That's a mature John Lennon, where he wrote Girl when he was 25. Now at 40, he wrote Woman. She's no longer a girl. Now they're women. And he's talking about women. He's not objectifying them anymore. He realizes that women have a place in society other than to just be your servant. And Paul never spoke about that stuff. So he never had to correct or rewrite history because Paul was always pretty good with being politically correct. Very hard to be an artist for 60-something years and really never make a mistake other than being busted in Tokyo for pot. Think about it. Always very politically correct. Even he did this song on on his album, repeated warnings about Donald Trump. That was as close as he got to being a little bit political. But hey, Strictly, how are you? I don't talk about that stuff when I'm doing music shows, cycling. Um, but I will tell you that I think that Paul's stuff was amazing. And I've heard his new song, and Mike put something out. I think the new song is brilliant. I think Paul found a voice that he can sing in now. I don't think there's any pitch correct in there, Mike. There may be. I don't know. But it's a strong song. It reminds me, Paul is getting Ringoitis. Ringo will always mention the Boys or Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Ringo goes back to his past and embraces it. You haven't heard what, Mike? But I think that I think it's a solid song, McCartney's song, and he refers to his past because at this age, that's what you do. I come on here and talk about the 1980s all the time, and I'm not a rock star. Oh, okay. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I don't think McCartney would do that. Paul's a guy that won't change his key in concert because he wants to be authentic. So I agree with you, Mike. I don't think that he did. I think he probably rested quite a bit before doing this album, obviously, which you should. If you're going to do an album, you should rest your voice, right? But I think that he is Paul McCartney. I could have told you in 1971 that we weren't getting. No, they wouldn't have. In 1971, you weren't getting another Yesterday out of Paul McCartney. You weren't. There's one Sistine Chapel. Sometimes everything falls into place, and it falls perfectly. Oh, that's great, Mike. Yeah, if you don't remember the 80s, but you're still alive now, that means you were in the 80s. That's true. I used to joke around when I was in my band and said the only thing I regret about cocaine is that I didn't find it sooner. But that's not true for anybody listening, that cocaine is not your friend, regardless of what Rick James used to say. But I think that you look at the output for Paul McCartney. Paul has come in and out of many, many genres. You know, music has changed a lot in 5 decades. And that comes, do I think John Lennon would have been very successful? Well, I think John had reason to be fearful. You have to remember, in 1983, Islands in the Stream crossed over from country and was #1 on Billboard pop. Music had changed. Now, I had heard, I don't know, Mike, if you've heard this, but I've heard that Double Fantasy, the first clippings were not good. And John was sitting on his windowsill. If you see that picture of John sitting on a windowsill with a black leather jacket, he used to sit on the windowsill a lot. And she came in and he said, well, and he said, it's not where we'd want it to be. And John looked at her and said, well, mother, at least we still have the family. Now, I don't know if that really was true. I don't know. But it sounds like something he'd say. Now, was John a bit delusional? Because there were a lot of reports that his marriage with Yoko was not good. If everyone's talking about it, there probably is some truth to it. Now, the man that she hooked up with after John, Sam, was wearing John's clothes out in public. I kind of probably believe it. Now, I was told from Jack Douglas's nephew / godson that up until a few months before he died, John was still seeing May Pang. He'd meet her in his dentist office, and that Yoko had a boyfriend. I kind of think that John and Yoko wanted to be the Rich and Liz, the Romeo and Juliet of rock music. I think they wanted this persona and they built it. You can't listen to certain people that worked for Yoko because they were working for Yoko. She's going to sanitize it. You know how I know that he loved May Pang? Because now May Pang also puts herself in every picture. May Pang has made a career on an 18-month affair with John Lennon. She has airbrushed herself into every story in that 18 months. So does she exaggerate? Not necessarily. Just, sometimes you think a girl loves you and she never calls you again after saying, "Oh my God, I loved our date." Why not? Were you nuts? No, you believed her. I think that Yoko's publicist went and said that, no, I think that May meant something to John. He had to bite his lip when he said that because he's still Yoko's publicist. So, strictly, I'm going to bounce you out of here. Yeah, you're breaking chops. I asked you nicely. So, you look at it and I really won't bounce you out of here. But you look at it, I believe that John thought he loved May Pang. And I'll tell you why. Your girlfriend breaks up with you. You'll like it. Strictly, you'll like this too. If you're past your politic thing. And Mike, your girlfriend breaks up with you. You go out, and there's one night on the weekend. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Mike. You go out on the weekend, and there's this one Saturday night that you're not with your girlfriend, who you miss because she broke up with you. But you're out with the guys for the first time in a long time. It feels like the way you used to be in college before you all had girlfriends and everything. And you had a great time that night. Now, if your girlfriend goes back with you and says, "Did you have a good?" "Oh, no, honey, I missed you. I don't want to be with them, but you had a great time." It's the narrative. What fits the narrative? And I think that you look at all of it that May Pang said John saw his friends, right? In LA, he was hanging out with the Hollywood vampires, Zappa, and all those people that drank, Nilsson and Keith Moon. Yeah, John was acting like it was 1958 again. Everyone. "God to Get You Into My Life" is about pot. Paul McCartney wrote that about marijuana. Mike can second that because Mike is the Paul McCartney expert. Michael Nolan, the bottom line, check his channel out. Outstanding. And he's the Paul McCartney expert. But I think it was written about pot, actually. Pretty scary when he must have really liked it. So I think that if I went and hung out with guys from the 80s, I'd probably have a great time too. Until I saw at 2 a.m. that I wasn't that 24-year-old anymore and I was dead tired. Yes, about pot. And I think that John liked for a second being in control again. You got to remember, John Lennon called Yoko mother. Everyone John Lennon ever had in his life died on him. Stuart Sutcliffe, his uncle, who he's very close to, Brian Epstein, his mom, everyone he ever loved. And there's no doubt in my mind. Now, Mike, I'm going to tell you something that you'll get a kick out of. I don't spread rumors, but there's an actor that I know very well, and I saw pictures. He was very, very close to Elton John. He told me that Elton and John Lennon did have a thing. Told me that. He's the kind of guy that you just wouldn't think is lying to you. And I know that he was really in with Elton and Davy Johnson and all those people. And he supposedly, Elton was very infatuated with John Lennon. Yes, Mike. And I do believe that John was so insecure. And he did keep tabs of what Paul McCartney was up to. And as soon as he heard coming out, he couldn't get the tune out of he used to send his assistant to Tower Records on 72nd Street. And as soon he couldn't get that tune out of his head the whole day. And he joked around and said, well, I guess I got to come out of retirement now. If Paul's doing something decent and he's not doing rubbish anymore, it's probably folklore. But, I would wonder if Yoko wanted John out of her hair, but she was always there. There were reports that when he was in the Bahamas or Bermuda, she sent him away with the baby because she was having an affair and she was trying to decide if she was going to divorce him or not. That's the story. And she decided not to. Jack Douglas's nephew told me that they were in the Hit Factory and John took a swig of what he thought was water and it was straight vodka and he spit it all over and almost ruined one of the Marshall stat amps. 1980. And I was also told from someone that was in the Hit Factory at the time, told me that when the people from San Francisco came over to interview him, he had an I Love Paul button on. And they were in the limousine trying to get him and I'm going to stop you right now because they were trying to get stuff out of him. He goes, look, I love Paul. I would love to think Paul would do anything for me. He loves me. I would like to think I'd do anything for him. And I recently spoke to him. The story goes that Jack Douglas told the nephew that told me that John was always sat on the control room with his legs up, like crisscrossed, and always wore this light blue jean shirt. And he was talking to Andy Peoples, and he said, that Paul, I just can't figure him out. He goes, I spoke to him. He was really happy I was coming out. And he said he'd stop by the studio and maybe even, lay a bass line down that everyone would have to swear to secrecy. And he hasn't called. Jack Douglas got very quiet and David Geffen walked out of the room hastily. The next day, John asked Geffen, what's wrong? You're kind of like and he demanded to know. And it was either Jack Douglas or one of the receptionists that said, Paul calls all the time. Yoko won't put him through. He took his old harmony guitar and smashed it and said, I know him longer than where do you come off? He had a big fight with her. I kind of believe it. I think that the stories are fun. There's always a lot of truth to them. That's true, October. There was a story that they came by, Linda and Paul, Elliot Kelb. Well, you know what? I'm just going to let you watch the story. I would think that my friend Mike has heard this. Not Kelb. Let me find it. You're going to love this. This is great. I'm sure that. Yeah, Mike, I want you to see that. I'm going to find.
During Christmas, in the latter part, I think it's 1978. I'm in New York. They invite me to the Dakota to spend one of the Christmas days with them. And I go up to the Dakota, and I notice in the living room there's a vase with a single branch of a tree that's their Christmas decoration. And I sat down on the white couch in the white living room, and we're just making small talk. And then there's a knock on the door after the intercom, and he opens it, and Paul and Linda McCartney walk in. And they greet each other.
Had you met Paul?
Never. No, I had not met him up to that moment. And they come in, and John just said, "This is our friend Elliot." And I said, "Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Linda." And we sat and we talked for a while. It was how should I say it? It wasn't overly jubilant. It wasn't icy. It was just correct. And then they decided to go to a place called Elaine's, which was the cause celeb of restaurants in Manhattan at the time. And we got into Paul's car and we went up to Elaine's, the five of us, and they perused the menu, all of them. Didn't see anything they particularly liked, and Elaine's did have a reputation. I mean, you walk in and there's Woody Allen, there's Gore Vidal, and there's Tom Wolfe, and there's, all those people. But the food was miserable. And everybody knew it, and it was reviewed as being awful. And Elaine could be problematic as well. And Linda said, there's a great pizza place not far from here. Really thin-crusted pizza, Do you think you could get a pizza delivered here and we could eat that? And she said it directly to me. Who else was she going to suggest it to? Yoko, would you drop the dime? And I knew what a social faux pas was this. But I also knew that Elaine was not going to escort it. You must leave my restaurant. We had the pizza delivered through the back door. It was taken out of the cardboard box. It was put on beautiful Elaine's plates and brought out so a casual observer would think it's a dish that they hadn't seen yet. We had the pizza. It was pretty good. And then we took a car back to the Dakota. And then we went back into the White Room. The sun was setting. And Linda and Yoko kind of went off on their own. Yoko always loved Linda McCartney. They got along great. And John and Paul kind of wandered over to this very, very tall window that looked down upon the west side of Manhattan. And the lights were coming on. You saw some of the Christmas decorations, etc. And me, the fifth wheel, was sitting on the couch, looking at the white carpeting and the branch in the vase. And I could pick up bits and pieces of conversation. Now, I've explained many times when people say, how can you report exact conversations you had with John and Yoko in your book and go on for paragraphs and paragraphs when you never had a diary, you never kept a journal, and obviously I never tape recorded them except when we were on the radio. I have an answer for all that, but in this case, because I could barely hear, they were far away, I can only catch spasms. And it was small talk, nothing of substance. And I do remember Paul asking John, so you're making any music these days? And John replying to Sir Paul, no, my time is with me baby. That's what I do all the time. I don't make any music. What about you? And Paul said, I'm always making music. I make music every day of my life. I can't stop making music. And I thought to myself as I sat on the couch, what would have happened if John bit the bait and said, I got a couple of guitars in the other room.
Yeah.
Why don't I bring them out, just for the hell of it? And the two of them could have sat in the living room and maybe change the face of contemporary music.
Yeah. One more time.
One more time. The McCartneys stayed for another hour or so and left. I stayed on with John and Yoko. And again, wondering why they had me there. So I asked them. And they said, no big deal. You were coming in for Christmas and they were around. So why didn't you like them? And I said, no, they seem like very, very nice people. How did that feel for you? He said, what do you mean? How did it feel to me? And I said, was there any tension? He said, it was dismissive. He said, you were with us all afternoon. Well, I mean, the two of them have known each other since they were 9 years old, practically.
That was probably the last time. It was around 78 that they saw each other. And I think that the Beatles would have gone back together. If I had to guess when, 9/11, maybe for Live Aid. Lennon was the thespian musician in New York. He would have been deferred to in New York, especially if he was active. So I would think at that point they probably would have gone on stage together. Now, Jack Douglas's nephew also told me that George Harrison, the only reason he did the anthology was because he was broke. He was hemorrhaging money. He was ripped off. And that if he was flush, he probably wouldn't have done it. But he changed his tune. Also, he told me that originally, Elton John was asked to finish the John Lennon unfinished songs, and Elton told Yoko no. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if any of it's true, but I don't. He just didn't strike me to be the kind of gut kid. He's a couple of years younger than me to lie about it. He did tell me a story that I did hear. Jack Douglas was a musician in the 60s. Not going to see him 2 weeks before he died, spoke to him. And so Jack Douglas and a friend around 64 with their guitars, they jumped on a steamer, went to Liverpool, couldn't get off the boat because of not having the right paperwork. Jack Douglas snuck off the boat, went to the London Echo newspaper, yes, on the phone, and said, we're getting kidnapped. They won't let us off the boat. I snuck off the boat. The editor sent a press team down in front of that boat, made them look so bad that they gave them a 2-week or a month visa to get off the boat. This guy ends up knowing a band and says, you guys want to work while you're here? You could, across the street, there's a pub, you could play in the band. They play in the band and Douglas thinks they're doing great. And some fans come in and say, oh, these girls want to meet you around the corner, and it's cops, and they arrest them. They get sent back for working without documentation. Well, John and Yoko go into the Hit Factory to record the Christmas song. And Jack Douglas is working there as like a flunky, and he's up in the editing room or the tape room. John Lennon couldn't get the track down wanted to break. He goes upstairs, opens the first door, and it's Jack Douglas where he's in, and there's a couch there. And Douglas is like this. And he said, you mind if I sit down? Jack Douglas, no. Lays down. He starts talking, lights up a cigarette, and Jack Douglas says, I was in Liverpool once. And John says, oh, yeah, tells him the story of what happened. And John says, that was you? John had heard the story. He said, we were number one in America. We're in America, and we're calling back home, and you're the front page. That story of you guys sneaking in and all that. So he said to Jack Douglas, who's this flunky, hey, come downstairs. I'll find something for you to do. I'm going to start recording again. He walks in with John, and everyone's looking like, what the hell are you doing? And John says, no, he's going to come with us. And everybody went like this. So he asked Jack Douglas, you know of any place we could sneak in and out to eat? They had just rented Bank Street apartment, where we can get in. Yeah, I'll show you around. He shows him around. They get friendly. They lose contact a bit. He hooks up with John in 1974 when John is producing the Pussycat album. And Jack now was doing an Aerosmith album. And he said, bring them out to LA. John said, you can bring them wherever you want. There's good. Tell them you're coming out here and come visit me. Stay with me, hang with me. Comes there. He loses contact again with him. Fast forward to 1978. John Lennon is giving his kid lessons at the Y, Upper West Side. Jack Douglas is across the street and happens to run into him. Have you been? Blah, 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 blah. Gives him his number. Jack never calls him. Jack Douglas, a year later, walks toward his house in the village and hears his phone ringing incessantly. Gets to the phone, and it's someone that says, you interested in producing an album? Can't tell you who it is, blah, 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 blah. Meet us at the heliport or the seaport, whatever, where they have these seaplanes. I'll bite. He goes. Brings him out to where Glen Cove, where Lennon's house was. A Japanese lady greets him on the dock. Comes in. She said, John is going to call in a half hour. John calls him. Mother's going to give you a cassette. I don't know if it's any good, but I know you'll be honest with me. And then Yoko proceeds to give him a whole big manila envelope of her shit. Go home, listen to it, get a hold of me tomorrow, let me know if it's any good. Goes home, John calls him. He goes, John, it's amazing. You don't have to do anything to it. You could practically, the way it's written, you could do it. No, really. All right, get a band together. My contemporaries, because if I want to break into bebop-a-loo-wop, I don't want people looking at me like, what's that? People my age that would know the songs that I like. Jack Douglas tells everyone, meet me on the corner of 72nd and Central Park West. A couple of them now start to think they know Lennon lived there. And they go up into Lennon's apartment and they do a dry run. And I don't know if it was Hugh McCracken, someone who had played with Paul a couple of years before. He was real nervous. And John said to him, you played with Paul a couple of years ago. When he goes, yeah. He goes, well, now you're going to play some real music. They got a couple of the guys from Cheap Trick. And they didn't know who to use. Cheap Trick was on tour in Canada. They come back and they find out they might back Lennon. But Lennon felt bad because he had promised the studio musicians originally and he used them. There's a couple of songs out there, I'm Losing You and Clean Up Time, that Cheap Trick actually backs him on. You can find it on YouTube. He was sued, yeah. Listen, there's 7 notes. Every song transposes and borrows and nicks, as Paul McCartney would say, off someone else's song. That's just music. That's music. But so Jack Douglas had a relationship with John Lennon. And I think John Lennon would have toured for Double Fantasy. And I definitely think he would have been involved in the anthology, and I think he would have liked it. I think the best thing for him would have been to divorce Yoko Ono, and I'm not so sure that wouldn't have happened down the line. But I think, like Mike said, she was controlling. I don't think she wanted him near his friends. The last time he had visited England was a few years before. He was planning a trip in January to go to England. He hadn't seen his family in a while. And his uncle said he walked in like a robot with Yoko. He says, "Let me show you the greenhouse and the addition we did to the back." He walks out. After like 5 minutes outside, he's the old John telling jokes. It was like the old John Lennon. They go back into the house. John's like mesmerized again with Yoko, like he turned into a shell again. I think she had a weird hold over him. I think she had him convinced that he couldn't survive without her. Oh, really? That's interview. That's interesting. Wow, really, Mike? Yeah, Paul's a perfectionist. You know, the thing with Paul, now look, I'm a musician. I was in a band. I toured. I have songs copywritten. I've sold songs. I started getting good when I realized I'd never be a Paul McCartney. You know, I'd be me, right? So now I can just fail. But Paul McCartney would come into the studio, and Mike's a musician. He'd notice. Paul will come in. Every part is written. Paul's got the bass line, 4 in the bar with the drums. He's got everything written. And what happens when you have a writer like that, you become sidemen. Paul's pretty much telling you what to do. And you almost become sidemen to him. And I think look, Ringo walked out because of it. George resented that he didn't learn to be a better guitarist because of Paul stifling him. Paul was a control freak. But I think also, they were very lazy. John was the laziest man in England. He'd lay on the couch and get stoned. Ringo would sit in his backyard. Paul was the one to call, "Come on, guys, time to do another album." I really believe after Brian Epstein died, if Paul had John's personality, they would have broke up. Paul's a workaholic. And Paul likes being in a band. Paul likes being in a band. He likes the camaraderie. And he really tried, because everyone thought Wings were just sidemen for Paul. It's Paul McCartney and Wings. He really tried in 76 with Speed of Sound to incorporate everyone in, to really be a band. And I think Joe English did a great song, Must Do Something About It. He did a great job on that. Denny Lane's talented. And Denny Lane, you know, the Beatles opened up for the Moody Blues, I think in 63. They actually opened up for them. Paul McCartney knew Denny Lane for a long time. And they opened up for the Kinks also. The Beatles were second on the bill to a lot of these bands that they blew through. Yeah, he had a roadmap in his mind, Mike. Paul knew exactly what he wanted because Paul is that talented a musician. So I couldn't come in. I could ad lib. Fills, whatever you want. But to sight read, I'm screwed. Paul was a great musician. Paul pretty much knew how to play everything. And if he didn't know, by the time you got out of the studio a month later, he'd know how to play it. So Paul was amazing. And he just knew what he wanted to hear because he heard it. Probably much like Brian Wilson. but probably not as demanding. And they conned Brian Wilson that he was real sick and everything, and they had him believing he was nuts. And okay, because you must be right, I'm crazy. Paul McCartney was very hard to deal with. I had heard in 1968 he wasn't very well liked. Neil Aspinall, Derek Taylor, they couldn't stand him. In 68, he was doing a lot of coke. Paul had got into coke in 67, 68. And he was becoming difficult. And they all were. They all were very difficult. You can never imagine what it's like to be a Beatle. First of all, you start believing your press clippings that you are all that. John Lennon called them all in for a meeting once to announce that he was Jesus Christ. And they said, well, okay. Mike, back then it wasn't like now. There was no security. Back in the day, I don't know if Mike ever heard this. Someone showed up at Paul McCartney's house, a long beard and everything. He said, I'm Jesus. And Paul said, well, you better come in then. Paul made him a cup of tea, brought him to the studio to hang out. And he told the guys, he says he's Jesus, just in case. I don't know. They never saw him again. It was different back then. It was different back then. People hitchhiked. You'd have them over your house for 3 days. No one cared about anything back then. The Beatles were the Beatles. Tough act to follow. And Paul followed it and was the biggest band of the 70s. Imagine. And don't think for a second that John wasn't jealous as hell. That fueled a lot of the anger, probably. That he was very jealous of Paul. That probably fueled a lot of it. Being angry that Paul just found it so easy to become a... That's why he knocked his music. But in the 70s, you had groups like Led Zeppelin came out. Music changed. Pete Townsend hates Led Zeppelin. Why do you think? Because the Who started that sound, and Zeppelin has sold 300 million albums, and the Who have sold 100 million. That's why. Because they bettered what you made and became gods. And Pete Townsend felt, we started it all. We opened the door and you came in and took all the glory as being the greatest thing ever. That's why Townsend hates, that's why he hates Zeppelin. He's jealous. Nothing to be jealous of. He's great. I always thought the Kinks got banned for 3 years in America because of a big fight with the press at a concert, and they got barred. And I always thought that hurt the Kinks. In formative years, 67, 68, 69, when the Kinks could have really, the Beatles were breaking up, they could have really made their way into America. They were barred out of America. That hurt the Kinks a lot. Kinks are brilliant, right? The Preservation Society. The problem with the Kinks was they were a little too British. The Who sold You Want America a bit more. The Who was they were like Squeeze, the Kinks. It's not cricket. A lot of English, British terms that Americans say, what is cricket? They Americanized their music a little more, the Who. The Kinks were very British. It's called kitchen sink pop. The Backyard and The Rent. Ray Davies, though, was a genius. And usually when you're a genius, something suffers. If you are a doctor that works 20 hours a day for the rest of your life, you're probably not going to have a great marriage. You probably weren't the greatest father. Something suffers with greatness. For as great as you are, there's a flip side. You are neglecting something. And you're giving up a lot to be great. As George said, the Beatles gave up their nervous systems. They were young men. They couldn't go on a date. They couldn't go to a movie. Ringo used to sneak from London back to Liverpool and wear disguises. That's where they got the idea. Paul brought that idea to Hard Day's Night with the disguises. A year later, after Help, the Beatles wanted Lord of the Rings. They asked Epstein to secure them Lord of the Rings. That was going to be their third movie. It ended up being Magical Mystery Tour. They had a 3-movie contract. They wanted Lord of the Rings. The writer said no. He didn't want to cheapen it with a rock group. Ray and Dave were always fighting. Ray Davies used to live in the Mayflower in Manhattan. My friend was a doorman there. A big, beautiful building. He remembers when Dave had the stroke. Ray and Dave got close again. Dave had a debilitating stroke about 20 years ago. It took him about a year to learn how to play guitar, talk, and everything again. And Ray was there for him. And Ray, which a lot of people don't know, tried suicide. And Dave saved him. Dave walked in on him. They've been through a lot, those two. And I guess the Gallagher brothers learned from, they were the Who to Led Zeppelin. They just brought it to another level. Dave Davies, who's a lot bigger than Ray, started beating the hell out of him on stage. He had a Christmas outfit on, Ray Davies, and Dave punched the hell out of him on stage. Dave used to do the song, what's that song, The Clown or whatever. And in the middle of it, Ray Davies would just stop him and say, all right, Dave Davies, and the song wasn't even over yet. Yeah, they just had, but you got to remember, a lot of drugs are involved. Dave Davies' boyfriend during that time was Long John Baldry. Dave Davies was bisexual for a while. And Long John Baldry was his partner for a long time in the middle 60s. And Long John Baldry is where Elton John got his name John from. Long John Baldry, because he played with him. But, rock and roll, you can go on and on with the stories. But the Beatles story never gets old. And a lot of their fans are dying off now. You do see younger people at Paul McCartney concerts. I'll leave you with this story. Since my son was a baby, I'd have CDs on in the car. And I used to listen to the Beatles all the time. And yeah, he wouldn't let them do it. So what happened was, my son kept on saying, like a year later, play Sunday Monkey. I said, what? Play Sunday Monkey. What's Sunday Monkey? I had one of these DVD holders with like 100 CDs in them. And I would I would try it. Is it this song? Is it this song? Is it this song? Is it this song? One day, it's on. Michel, my belle, Sunday Monkey, bon très bien on song. That's it. I said, you got to be kidding me. Sunday Monkey? Yeah, I convinced him to be a Beatle fan, even at that age. Mike, thank you so much for coming in. Say hello to your beautiful wife. I hope you're all doing well. And Mike, you told me there was a little, I don't know if it was, you went through a little bit of a rough time. I hope you're okay. And please, I'm a life coach and your money's no good with me. I have students. You ever need me, hit me up, brother. lovethehits@gmail.com. Please hit me up. I mean that. If you need me. Be well, everybody. Thank you for coming in. God bless you all.